Hey everyone, it's Clint. Welcome to Sweetcast. I want to talk about comic shops because it's an ongoing problem and an ongoing topic that keeps getting brought up over and over again. I haven't really looked into the numbers as to what is being sold online, what's being sold elsewhere, but there's a problem with comic shops. I'm not into like guilt buying. Don't buy it somewhere else when you could buy it local. There's something morally better about buying local. Now that's fine. Like, I like buying local. The problem is it's not really a good enough reason to buy local. Like, it has to be competitive in the marketplace. Now the marketplace is so much bigger. You are competing with online. It's a complicated mess. And so a lot of people say you got to buy comics at a comic shop. I would rather, instead of it being driven by guilt, I would much rather have it be driven by common sense. How do you do that? You got to compete with online sales. That's what it comes down to. Not only that, but you got to get people in the store actually buying books. This is a nice store. I love that picture. That's a good layout for a store. So I wanted to show you a few different things. This article came out January 7th, and it's basically 2 big problems, 4 solutions, and a promise. And these are for comic book shops. Now I'm going to summarize this a bit. Okay, so problem 1 is essentially that it is too expensive to stock comics. It's really expensive to run a comic shop, believe it or not. Buying the pure volume of titles, there's so many titles coming out from even just the big 2 publishers, let alone any other publisher that you might want to try out. So many titles, and there's not enough space. The price of comics has risen. There's so many factors that it makes it really hard to run retail. And it's not just unique to comics. Retail is difficult no matter where you go, right? So they jump here. The bottom line is that the people in the comic industry who can least afford it are taking the biggest risks. And those are comic book shops. A lot of those are small business owners. A lot of those are new shops buying comics. And Marvel and DC and Diamond have made it a point to mitigate that risk or pass it on to retailers, which is sad if you think about it, because at the end of the day, retailers are the ones ultimately buying those books. So you'd want to help them out so that they can continue buying books. All right, so here's solution 1 in this article. It's publishers should be our partners, and that's a tough one because what exactly does that mean? It definitely gets complicated. I think really when you capitalize on what is in your both of your best interest, your self-interest, that's where you want to go. So he brings up returnability, but I thought this was an interesting take on it. It shows up a little bit later down, but I'll address it now. Returnability, not for everything, just for number 1 issues. That's a big deal. That's interesting. I don't think I've heard of that before. So on issue number 1, you're going to buy multiple copies because you're not going to be saddled with them. You're going to return everything that doesn't sell. And the good thing is that you're going to have enough copies, hopefully, that people are going to be able to get into a new series if they're interested in it. And maybe they do have more number 1 copies, but it just gives them a little bit more confidence from the retail level in order to buy more books. And then when it comes to issue number 2, issue number 3, issue number 4, there's no returnability. I think that's a really good compromise because there used to be returnability. Now it moved so far away from that there's no risk. This is just take a little bit of risk on that number 1 issue. All right, problem number 2. This is a big one. I think everyone can understand. They mentioned that a lot of people treat comic shops like a big showroom. So they'll go to the comic shop, they'll look at the books that they might be interested in getting, they'll treat it like a showroom, they'll spend 0 money, and then they'll buy those same products, those same books online now that they've seen it in person. And that's because online sales can undercut them by a lot. I once started a little game business with my brother. We were selling games. We wanted to, I wanted to do comics, but it was like, one thing at a time. It was a terrible business idea. It was just, everything was wrong about it. But one thing I noticed is that even the price that you were getting from a distributor was being matched, or in some cases beat, on Amazon. The prices on Amazon are so low, it is literally impossible to make it. You cannot compete on price alone with online sales. So what happens is the people that are able to buy in huge bulk or Amazon. You can have massive bulk. You can sell it online and make razor thin profit margins. And because you're online and your expenses are lower, your costs are lower, you're going to be able to do better. You can do it that way. When you've got an in-person store, brick and mortar store, you've got to pay to keep the lights on. You've got to pay your staff. You've got to, there's a lot of expenses that come with it. So competing on price makes absolutely no sense. So you just wouldn't make any money. It's not a non-profit organization. Here's the solution. Okay, this is really smart. I've seen this before in many places. They call it MAP pricing. Maybe you've heard about that. It stands for minimum advertised pricing. I once worked for a company that did this. It was they sold waterfalls and things like that. Slate waterfalls. I think I mentioned that before. They had MAP pricing. It was the smartest thing that I've ever seen. Essentially what it is, it's an agreement between the manufacturer, the distributor, and the retailers, and that is that you cannot advertise anywhere less than X amount of dollars. You cannot sell online for anywhere less than X amount of dollars. What that does is it preserves a profit margin for everybody involved. It also means that if someone comes in store to buy something, you have the freedom to actually make prices lower, so long as you're not selling it online like that, or you're not advertising it like that. But at the very least, it just preserves a profit margin for everybody. Now, what always comes up with that is enforcement. It's actually a lot easier than you would think. Again, I worked in a business that did this because different retailers will tattle on each other. They will check for advertised pricing. They'll look online and figure out who it is that's posting, books on eBay or books on Amazon at, below MAP pricing. And you can get in big trouble. Then if you lost your ability to buy from Diamond Distribution, that's a big deal. That's damning. So retailers, generally speaking, they're going to stick with it, and they like it because it gives them a profit margin. You've built it into the business model. And it's already tough enough. But I do actually think that MAP pricing is really helpful. What would that mean? That would mean that prices for online comics would be a little bit higher than they are now. And that raises the question of what is the goal, right? If you want to keep comic shops, if you find them important to the industry, I think he's right in this article. MAP pricing is something that is really important. I think you'd have to do it. Yeah, the downside is that comics everywhere, on online, for online retailers, they're going to be more expensive if they're, as long as it's not secondary market stuff. But if it's coming from a retailer, they can't sell it for less than that minimum advertised pricing. And usually that's not MSRP. It's a little bit lower than MSRP. So you can still say that you're cutting a discount, but you can't undercut your competitors that are selling the exact same product. All right, there's another solution, and it was comic store exclusives. I know that this has been a thing in the past. I don't know how difficult it is to get comic stores exclusives, and I was thinking about this a little bit, but again, because I've been looking at some of the old Daredevil issues, when you start looking at it, they have like the newsstand edition, and then they have the direct market edition, and there was only, like, as far as I know, I'm not a genius at all this kind of stuff, but it was just a little corner tag. If there was a barcode, then you knew it was for a newsstand. If it just had Spider-Man's head on it, then you knew that it was for the direct market. So rather than have those kinds of superficial differences, this article suggests some other superficial differences. That's a thicker cover stock, a few added pages, and a contractual obligation not to sell below X% of cover price for 60 or 90 days. I actually think that's not a bad idea. So you get a better product. If you go into the store, you're going to have something unique. Perhaps it's worth a little bit more, at least in perceived value, and it makes it worth it for people to go into a store as opposed to buy online. I like this solution because you could still buy online if you want, but it's going to be just a different product, a slightly different product. And, that might be enough to drive people to go to the comic shops. Let's see. All right. So there we go. Also, can it be policed? And yeah, it can. How many comic shops sell a day early? Sell on Tuesdays instead of Wednesdays for new comics. It really doesn't happen very often, and that's because nobody wants to get in trouble with Diamond. All right, now here, this is a really important point from this article. It says, one caveat to this: just because it's exclusive doesn't mean it's good. Quality stories that matter and quality art sells. Short-term one-off publishing is a diminishing return game. Absolutely. When there's a really interesting series that people are into, they're going to keep going and buying it. There's word of mouth, all that kind of stuff. So yeah, obviously that's what the thing that we've been crying out for so long. And I would suggest, especially Marvel, talking to you, publish fewer titles rather than flood the shelves and make retailers make these really tough decisions. Just do fewer titles. Put your the best people on those books. Maybe it costs a little bit more money that you're focusing on them, but let's face it, right now it's a shotgun spray anyway. All right, and then we talked about a few other things. Keep the store well lit, stocked, clean, yada yada yada. That kind of brings me over to here. I thought this was interesting. This is actually a few years old. It's Blast Off Comics owner explains why most comic book stores barely stay afloat, and he pointed out some really obvious things, but then he pointed out something that was a little different, and I thought were worth mentioning. And that was, I know this is going to get totally misconstrued, but I think there's some wisdom here. Okay, that was that the biggest growth market is actually women. All right, here it is. Listen closely. Hear him out, okay? I've got some more points to make after, but hear him out.
Experience. Do you know what the woman shopping experience is? No, you don't. You might think you do, but you don't. There's research.
You might think you do. Yeah, this is where it comes down to, I think, a lot of the failed practices. If there's more growth market in women, all we need to do is make books that bash on straight white men, that play to all these really weird stereotypes of comics that women like. None of that is based on research. It's just based on whatever couple of old dudes wondering how to appeal to women. It's not how it works. But he's right. There is research, and he points some things out that actually have nothing to do with SJWism or anything like that.
That's developed over the last 80 years that you can read about, that are all about the psychology of women shopping. And you can take that information and collate it and go, okay, it has to be clean, it has to be open, because women need space when they shop, it has to be bright, it has to have soft music, it has to have some kind of female employees so they're comfortable. It has to have the type of product that speaks to them in a certain way, that they want to come back and back and back.
All right, so it points out there's market research that exists. And I think there's a lot of leeway in what exactly you could do, but it's smart. And there are basic things like have a clean store. And I appreciate a clean store. I think a lot of people appreciate a clean store. But it's almost like you just need the right conditions to get a new customer. And I got to point out one thing he said earlier was that, don't cater to the fans that you have. They're going to come anyway. I would say that that's not 100% true. As we've seen a lot of people leave comics. They'll stop reading if you treat them poorly. You still want to remember them. But again, it's pretty easy to do some of those really basic shopping experience things for a brick and mortar store that will make things comfortable enough for new readers. And also, I'd say make sure that you've got product that are for your traditional fan base. And if you're doing it right, if you're doing good books, anybody's going to enjoy it. Just like film, it's really not that complicated. And trying to make these stories this very certain exact way, you just make good stories. Again, television does it. All right, so there's some food for thought. I want to know what your thoughts are on comic book shops. Again, I don't think that anybody should feel like they need to buy at a local comic shop out of guilt. I think that there has to be some market changes in order to make it be a smart decision to do, or at least something that you can justifiably say like, yeah, the cost versus the experience versus the product. Going to a comic shop is going to be my choice because there's these other benefits other than this, fake good feeling for supporting a local comic shop. You got to do better than that. Don't forget to like and subscribe if you like this content. And if you're interested in comics, Downcast 2 is coming out on Indiegogo. It'll be on a crowdfunding campaign. It's coming really, really fast. We're looking at January 21st for a launch date. That is a Tuesday. There should be one more paycheck, I think, for a lot of people before that time comes, and so that'll be nice. Set a little bit of money aside. I think I'm going to try and make this affordable and also make it really well worth your money. So check it out, and it's going to be more affordable if you sign up for the mailing list. It's in the description below. Thank you very much, and I will see you next time.